Welcome to the Ukraine Today newsroom. My name is Stephen Brees, and today I'm joined by Mr. Hiroaki Kuromiya. He's a professor at Indiana University in the United States and an expert on Soviet history. Nearly 20 years ago, he wrote a book called Freedom and Terror in the Donbas, a Ukrainian-Russian borderland. The book deals with tensions in the very place where today there's being a war fought in Ukraine. Welcome, Hiroaki.
Thank you.
Please tell us a little bit about your book and why it has relevance today.
It's a book I wrote many years ago, actually published in 1998. The Ukrainian edition was published in 2002, so it's a rather old book. But I feel that it still has some relevance because I try to understand the long-term questions of the Donbas. I titled the book Freedom and Terror in the Donbas, which means that Donbas has always functioned as some sort of a place of freedom, and as a result, Donbas suffered a great deal of terror, political terror in its history. It has relevance because, as I discussed in the book, Donbas was a very unpredictable place. Very few people understood what that is, what the people in the Donbas wanted. And that it really made it difficult for anyone to understand the place. And I'm not quite sure whether I understood it, but I did my best. And the best way to characterize it is it's a place of freedom. As a result, it suffered a great deal of terror. Now, what's happening there, well, that's very difficult to tell, but I think this history, this very complex, almost incomprehensible story of the Donbas has some relevance to what is happening there today.
Do you have to understand the history of the Donbas to understand what's happening there now?
Well, as I wrote in the book, Donbas has always fought against the intervention of outside power in their homeland, in the Donbas. Why is it? I think there is a great deal of distrust of outside powers. Why is that? Well, it's not easy to answer, but I think Donbas was always the last place for people who needed some degree of freedom or autonomy. A lot of people went there because they needed some kind of freedom. Many of them were politically persecuted, religious minorities, criminals, fortune seekers, fortune hunters, and all these people went there to find some kind of a new life, some kind of something that made them feel better, feel freer. And as a result, I think they thought it was the last place they could live, and as a result, they really did not trust outside power. They really rejected outside power. At the same time, they wanted their place as a place where they can feel a little freer or safer.
You've written that Leon Trotsky's claim that one can't go to the Donbas without a gas mask best describes the political history of the Donbas. Explain that, please.
Yeah, I think Trotsky said that because outsiders really had a problem in understanding the political life of the Donbas. Of course, there was a liberal democracy, Ukrainian nationalism, Marxism, socialism, communism. All these political parties wanted to organize the Donbas workers because it was such a big industrial center, very large group of people working there. So it would have been great for any political power to have support of these people working there. So yes, lot of people, lot of political parties tried to organize them. As far as I could tell, no one succeeded really. In 1917, at the time of the revolution, no Marxists, Ukrainian nationalists, Russian liberals, no Mensheviks, Bolsheviks, they had a hard time. Of course, then there was the civil war, there were anarchists, and there were all these struggles going on, and no one seemed to have captured the hearts and minds of the Donbas people. And that's why Trotsky said you cannot go there without a political gas mask. It's toxic in that sense, a toxic political place. They didn't seem to have trusted anyone. There was a degree of sort of Makhnovshchina in the sense that they did follow certain local or provincial, local political leaders. Yeah, but otherwise, they seem to have distrusted outsiders, left and right.
You have extensive knowledge of the history of the Donbas, but what can you say about solutions?
I wish I knew. If I knew solutions, I could become the president of Ukraine. So no, I don't have any good solutions. But what I could say is that yes, I do think the peace is important. We know that already more than 6,000 people are killed. That's a terrible loss, And I don't like it, of course. I don't think anyone likes it. Maybe Putin doesn't mind. I don't know. But I think peace is absolutely important. Beyond that, what could we do? Well, at least Russia has not recognized these two republics, so-called republics, which is good. And I think we need to force Russia to acknowledge that the Donbas is an inseparable, integral part of Ukraine. We have to nail Russia down on that point. And after that, we have to explore solutions that could be acceptable to Ukraine, to the rest of, to Kiev and the rest of Ukraine, and to the Donbas people as well. Now, of course, the Donbas demographic, great deal of change because so many people left, and some of people want to go back there. But anyway, we have to find solutions to the Donbas problem within the framework of independent Ukraine. Of course, that doesn't solve the question of Crimea. We don't know what to do with that. But I do have some fears that many difficult questions are solved by world powers, big powers. In this case, Russia, Ukraine, Russia, US, European Union. And I hope they won't strike a bad, rotten rule to the detriment of Ukraine. That would not be very acceptable to Ukraine. But of course, there is a danger.
So now, the people that are living in the Donbas, are they rejecting Ukraine as an outside power, or are they rejecting Russia as an outside power, in your opinion?
It's an interesting question. So I think before 1991, it was not really a frontier place anymore. I mean, in the old days, in the Cossack era, until the 18th century, it was more or less sort of frontier areas. So that's part of the reason why the Cossacks went there, why the Cossack movement emerged there, why people went there. Even in the 19th century, it was in a sense symbolically a frontier land because it opened up a great deal of opportunity because of industrialization, which attracted many people. And it was the kind of industrialization that attracted people who need a certain kind of freedom because it was not a safe place. Most of the labor, hard labor, very difficult labor, and of course labor underground. So not everyone wanted there, but those people who needed some kind of assurance, or the last resort in many respects. But during the Soviet period, it was no longer frontier land, but in 1991, they voted for the independence of Ukraine, yes? And I think since 1991, people there always thought their place as part of Ukraine because there was no other choice. Russia was already a foreign country, even though Russia was a neighbor. So their option wasn't there. It's just they thought their future in terms of independent Ukraine. That was the case until the very last moment, until Russia took Crimea and Russia started entertaining taking over the Donbas. Then suddenly, all of a sudden, a different kind of option emerged. And that gave them some kind of opportunity to use that option against Kiev. So yes, there was a discontent with Kiev, no doubt. Now, that doesn't mean that they wanted to be separated from Kiev. They want to become independent or they wanted to join Russia. I don't see any evidence of that. It seems to me that they were using the Russian option against Kiev so that they get what they want. Mm-hmm. Exactly what they want is not entirely clear. That's the mystery of the Donbas. It's always very clear. That's why the outsiders had so much problem with the Donbas.
You're a professor from Indiana University. Tell us, how do Americans understand the conflict in Ukraine?
Clearly, sympathies with Ukraine. Big guys is bullying smaller guy, right? Weaker guy, Ukraine. And of course, Russia used military power to take Crimea and using its own military power to intimidate Ukraine. So I clearly sympathies with Ukraine. And no one will really support Russia. However, there is a lot of sentiment in not in support of Russia, but sort of critical attitude toward the United States, because the United States is not an empire, but the United States certainly exercises its power quite extensively throughout the world. And there are some people who believe that Russia's response is legitimate in the sense that United States caused these problems by expanding NATO to the east, ignore the sensibility of Russia, and that this is a result. Well, that may be the case, but we also have to understand that Russia has been interfering in other countries' business all over. So no, this United States intervention in other countries, not in military intervention, perhaps intervention is not a reason for approving of what Russia has done or has been doing. But I think there is a subtle difference there. But yes, there are people who believe that the United States should take some blame for what happened. But that doesn't really convince me. I think that is a rather odd logic. Yes, I do not approve of what the United States does. Well, not everything, but certain aspects of U.S. policy. No, I don't accept them. But still, in this case, it's clear. It's clear that Russia is to blame. Average
people in the United States, do they know what's going on in Ukraine?
Well, I'm not an American, although I live there. My family is American. But I cannot speak for Americans. I can speak for myself. In general, of course, Americans are not particularly interested in foreign affairs. For good or for bad, I cannot say. When Russia misbehaves, they get angry. Yes, sure. So in that sense, they know what is happening, but they know very little about Ukraine. It doesn't register in their radar. That's very unfortunate. On the other hand, I can tell that my Ukrainian history class attracted quite a few people. Normally it doesn't attract many students, but this year I attracted quite a few people, and almost all of them, more than 90% of them, did extremely well. So there is a great deal of interest in that sense. Well, not a great deal of interest, but certain interest in what's happening in Ukraine. Certainly Ukraine has come into the radar scene of quite a few Americans, particularly educated or educated people, students. Yeah, so I think it's a good thing. It's a very good time for Ukraine because the sympathy of the entire world is with them, more or less, you see, because they were attacked by Russians. And for the first time, for many Americans, Ukraine simply began to, get into their life. So it's an excellent time for Ukraine. So Ukraine shouldn't waste this opportunity.
Mr. Hiroaki, thank you very much for your time, your insights, and your opinions.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thank you.